Going on, folks? Welcome to Study Hall. If it's your first time here, my name is Phillip Godfrey. If you're returning, welcome back, Bible Study family. And so, Study Hall is a Bible study that's built off the scriptures in Matthew 6:33, where the Messiah tells us to seek ye first the kingdom of the Father and his righteousness, and all things shall be added unto you. So, we gather to do just that, to see, seek, and serve the kingdom of the Father. All right. So, today we'll be continuing our study series entitled From Creation to Revelation, where we're walking through the entirety of the Bible, book by book, in one calendar year. Today, we'll be looking at the second half of Hebrews, so Hebrews chapters 7 through 13. Again, the book of Hebrews, chapters 7 through 13. If you want to catch any of the previous studies, they're up on my page in a playlist entitled From Creation to Revelation, and you can go and catch those there. But let's go ahead and jump into the book of Hebrews. If you haven't seen the first part of Hebrews, please go back and watch that. I'll link it here or somewhere. But you can go back and watch that and get the background of the book of Hebrews up until this point. So we're jumping right in today. All right. So chapter 7. We're picking up here where we left off in chapter 6 with the mention of Melchizedek as a priest and the Son, the Messiah, being a priest after his order, after the order of Melchizedek. And so as chapter 7 begins, we get more information on this Melchizedek that we've seen identified or named a few times in the book of Hebrews. So first, Melchizedek is the king of a city called Salem. Salem means peace. We'll see that in a second. And he's the king of a city called Salem and a priest of the Most High. Okay. This is the same Melchizedek again that met Abraham over in the book of Genesis, and who Abraham gave a tithe to, or a tenth portion, a tenth part of the spoil that he had received from the spoil that he received at a period of time. We're not getting too deep into that. Melchizedek, the writer notes, is interpreted as the king of righteousness. So Melchizedek is the king of righteousness and the king of peace, which Salem means peace. All right. So he's the king of righteousness and the king of peace. Melchizedek, is without mother, without father, without ancestors, and there is no beginning or end of his life. So who is Melchizedek? Who do you think Melchizedek is? You got any thoughts on that? But this Melchizedek is like the Son and abides as a priest forever. The writer then goes on to note how great this man must have been, how great Melchizedek must have been if Abraham gave a tenth to him, and how the law of Moses required that the priests, the descendants of Levi, collect a tithe from the other tribes in the same way that, very similar to the way that Abraham gave a tenth portion to Melchizedek. And it also goes on to say that because, since Levi was in Abraham's lineage, that he basically also paid tithes to Melchizedek as well. I didn't give my disclaimer. As always, go and read these chapters for yourself, study them out, because I could be telling you anything. I'm not, but I could be. The writer goes on to say that if the Levitical priesthood were actually perfect, then there would not be the need for another priest to come after the order of Melchizedek instead of from the lineage of Levi and Aaron. And so, since we now see through everything that we've seen from chapters 1 through 6 up until this point, and so now, since we see that there has been a priesthood change from the Aaronic and Levitical priesthood to the Melchizedek priesthood with the Messiah, then there is now also, according to the writer, a necessity of a change of the law as well. So because the priesthood has shifted, it is now needed that the law has shifted as well, that there be a new change in the law as well. This new priest, the Messiah, is actually of the tribe of Judah, who we see has no history of being aligned with the priesthood, the previous priesthood. But even though the Messiah did not meet the normal priesthood requirements, the Father still made him a priest by a decree and an oath. And this Messiah, the Son, has become, who we know to be Yahusha, has become a surety, a guarantee of a better testament. And testament simply means law. So a better law, a better covenant. And because he has life eternal, he will remain a priest forever, unlike the previous priest whose service ended with death. And so as believers, if you're a believer, he is unto us, the Messiah is unto us a high priest who is holy, blameless, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and made higher than the heavens. So without sin, when it says separate from sinners, it means without sin. And made higher than the heavens. Who does not unlike the previous priesthood, who does not need to go in and offer sacrifices daily to the Father for his sins and for the sins of the people. He, our Messiah, the Yahusha, the Son, he did this one time when he went in and offered himself as a sacrifice for people's sins. Does that make sense? Chapter 8 begins with the writer providing a summary basically of what he just said, and then stating that as believers, we now have this high priest in the Messiah who is sitting on the right hand of the throne of the Father in heaven, where he ministers. So he's in heaven, sitting on the right hand of the throne, but he's also there ministering in the true tabernacle, which the Father built and not man. And just like the earthly priest, he's making offerings on our behalf, but those offerings are being made in the true tabernacle, the heavenly tabernacle. Oh, man, that's good. Come on, hopefully you with me. He goes on to note that the priest on earth, the previous priesthood, were actually serving a shadow or a template of what the design was in heaven. So basically, everything that we saw the Levitical priesthood doing, the tabernacle, the showbread, the Holy of Holies, all those things, that was actually a shadow of what was already happening in heaven, or what was in heaven. And now the Messiah is actually serving in the true design, the true creation in heaven, and not the copy like everybody else was, like the previous priesthood was down here on earth. Does that make sense? Now, there's nothing wrong with the copy, but the Father, the Messiah, the actual one is elevated above the copy. You know, if you copy something, then the original, thank you, Holy Spirit, the original prevails. I got excited. Let me calm down a little bit. And so this covenant that the Messiah now mediates was established on better promises than the previous covenant, according to the writer here. He goes on to say that if the first covenant had not had any issues or had been faultless, then there would be no need for the second one. But the Father found fault with the people who he had made the first covenant with. And so we saw over in Jeremiah 31, where we looked at that study, that we saw the Father decree that he will now make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the one that he made with their ancestors, the previous covenant, but this one that he makes through the Messiah. What he will do with that one is he will put his laws into the minds and hearts of his people. That they will be his people, those believers, the ones who actually follow these things, they will be his people, and he, the Father, the Most High, will be their Yahuwah. And all from the least to the greatest will know him, and he will be merciful to them and remember their sins no more. These are the foundation. This is the promises of the better covenant that the Messiah now mediates. Does that make sense? And that he promised them over in Jeremiah 31, because the previous covenant had fault. He found fault with the people who he entered into covenant with. Hopefully that makes sense. The chapter 8 ends with the writer saying that since it was stated by the Father that there is a new covenant, then clearly the first one is now made old. Now, this does not mean that we should learn nothing or take nothing from the old covenant. No, the scripture also tells us that the things that were written aforetime were written for our learning, so that we through learning and patience may inherit the promise. And so, and additional to that, everything in the Old Testament scriptures are not an old covenant. So they're like the covenant, which we'll see here, the covenant and the old law, or the previous law, the first law, they were ratified by blood. These covenants were ratified by blood. And so the thing, like when Moses was on Sinai, and then when he sprinkled the blood on the people, that was ratifying a covenant. So that is the covenant, the commandments, not just the 10 commandments that we call the 10 commandments, but all the commandments that were given to Moses on Sinai, that is the law. But then we also see the Levitical law, the law of the tabernacle that was given, and then the tabernacle was ratified, was sprinkled with blood as well. Those are the covenants. But the writer here, he's saying these things, and then he's using prophecy from Jeremiah. So we can't say that everything in the Old Testament, everything from Genesis to Malachi, is irrelevant. That's not true. The writer is using an Old Testament prophecy to make the point here about the new covenant towards the Messiah. So it's all working together. Does that make sense? So get off that. All right. And so as we move into chapter 9, we see the writer discussing the first covenant and how the first covenant comes with a worldly sanctuary in the tabernacle. The tabernacle had a candlestick, the table, the showbread. We looked at all these things. You can go back and study them out in that study. The table, the showbread. After the veil, there was the Holy of Holies, where the high priest went in, went in alone once a year with blood and offerings for himself and for the sins of the people. These processes that they were given to follow were given to them by the Holy Spirit, and these things that this system highlighted were in place until the time of Reformation, or the time of change came. And so now the Messiah has come and become the high priest of a greater and more perfect tabernacle, which is the one in heaven. He's entered into the holy place once with his own blood and obtained eternal redemption for his people. And so this causes him to now be the mediator of the New Testament, the new covenant, that by his death, the transgressions from the first testament were redeemed and eternal inheritance was made available to the followers, to his followers. Does that make sense? And the testament, according to the scriptures, requires that there be the death of a testator. So we don't have to get into the details of that, but basically it's saying that when there's entered into a testament or a law, when it's at that period of time where it's entered into a new one, then there must be it only went into effect when the person died, when there was death, when there was blood. It goes on to say, which I just told you guys, but I want you to believe the scriptures. I don't want you to believe me. Oh, I didn't give did I give my disclaimer? Yeah, I did. And so the first covenant was ratified with the blood of an animal after Moses had shared the commandments with the people, and he sprinkled blood over them, and he sprinkled blood on the tabernacle and the objects that were used for ministry. I just mentioned that. And the chapter goes on and closes with the writer noting that this Messiah, the Son, who we know to be Yahusha, who has entered into the heavenly places in the presence of the Father, appears for us, that for those who look for him, he will appear a second time, coming again without sin, so not focused on sin, but unto salvation, but bringing salvation. So he's basically saying like, hey, the Messiah is coming again, and this time he's coming with salvation as his focus. Let's move into chapter 10. So chapter 10, we see here, starts with the writer noting that the law actually ended up reminding people about their sins every year because it is not possible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. It's noted here, and this is why the Messiah said over in the scriptures, and it notes Psalms chapter 40, but over in the scriptures, the Messiah says that the Father didn't, it wasn't the Father's will that he wanted animal sacrifices or sin offerings. So he gave him, the Messiah, a body to offer to him. Because the Messiah the Father never wanted the blood of animals. He didn't want animal sacrifices and sin offerings. No, he didn't want those things. So he gave the Messiah what he did want, which was a body to offer. Because why did we just saw that a testament requires the death of a testator. Animals cannot be testators. Does that make sense? So this truth gives us a boldness to now enter into the presence of the Father by the blood of the Messiah without a veil, and that we should draw near to him full of faith, holding fast to our profession and considering one another, like working together, remembering one another, to provoke each other unto love and good works, exhorting one another and not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together. Now, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. So the chapter goes on to say that if we keep on sinning after receiving the knowledge of truth, that there is no more sacrifice to cover those sins. That's what the writer says, not what I said. The writer says that if we keep on sinning after receiving the knowledge of truth, that there is no more sacrifice to cover those sins, that there is only an expectation of judgment for those people. And when it says that there's no more sacrifice to cover those sins, it means like that. Okay, never mind. I'll let you guys interpret that yourself. Thank you, Holy Spirit. The writer goes on to tell them not to cast away their confidence, but to trust in the Father. As it comes, this trust comes with a great promise of rewards. He tells them to be patient in completing the will of the Father, so that afterwards the promise can be received. For he says, after a while, the Messiah will come again, and the just The just shall be those who live by faith. So if you are just, you live by faith. And if you live by faith, you are just. The just shall be those who live by faith, but those who turn away from this, the Messiah will have no pleasure in. But those who are faithful, there is a promise that they will be saved. All right. Let's move into chapter 11. So in chapter 11, the writer is speaking to us about faith. First, he starts by saying that faith, so anybody wants a definition of faith, let's write it down. Faith is the substance. So substance, what is substance? Substance is tangible. So faith is the tangible place, or the tangible place of the things hoped for. So faith is where you stand when you're hoping for things that you cannot see. Hopefully that makes sense. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So faith is where you stand in true belief here in the natural of the things that you're hoping for when you can't see them. And by this faith, believing the things that you cannot see simply off of the promises of who gave them, the ancestors obtained a good report by this faith, okay? So it goes on to say that through faith we understand. So faith helps us to understand that everything was created by the word of the Father, and that the word also created the things that we see from things that are unseen, which shows us that everything that we see came from somewhere unseen. So if faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, it really means that faith is us being able to see the things that are unseen coming to see the things in the unseen. Let me say that again. What this really means is that if faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, and through faith we understand that all things that are created that we see come from things that are unseen, that faith is our ability to see in the unseen realm and stand on what we see in the unseen realm here where we still can't see it just yet. Does that make sense? He goes on to name all the people in the Old Testament whose faith stand out. In verse 6, it says that without faith, it is impossible to please him. For whoever comes to the Father must believe that he is. When he says, I am, over in the Old Testament, when he's in Exodus, I believe, when he says, I am, now he's saying you must believe that he is. Isn't that amazing? Anyway, so you must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them who diligently seek him. Let me go back. It first says in verse 6 that without faith, it is impossible to please the Father. What does this teach us? This means that with faith, it's impossible not to please him. Without faith, it is impossible to please him. So that means that with faith, it is impossible not to please him. So if you're trying to figure out how to please the Father, get some faith. Get your faith up. Stand in faith. It is impossible not to please him when we're in faith. And then the writer goes on to say that whoever comes to the Father must believe that he is. Remember, he said, I am. Now he's saying you must believe that he is that I am, that he is, and that he's a rewarder of those who diligently seek you. So we must believe and diligently seek, knowing that he rewards those who are seeking. Does that make sense? And so I'm intentionally not going through the chapter in depth, because I want you to go and read the stories of those of faith, right? I want you to go and read and be exhorted and be encouraged. And then I want to challenge you to stand in faith like them today. And I want to note that these people who are noted as standing in faith didn't stand in perfection. I want you to keep that in mind. But it goes on to say that by their great faith, all these that were noted, the word tells us that by their faith, they did these things. By their faith. It doesn't talk about their actions. Faith requires corresponding action, but that's not the highlighted part. Their faith is what moved them to act, not their actions causing anything to happen. Their faith is what moved them, all right? And so by their great faith, the word tells us that they subdued kingdoms. They overtook kingdoms. They operated in righteousness. They obtained promises. They stopped the mouths of lions, Daniel. They wrenched the violence of fire, the Hebrew boys. They escaped the edge of the sword. They were made strong in weakness. They became strong in fighting. And they caused whole armies to flee by their faith. Through faith, it says that the dead were raised. Some were raised to life, and still others were. And even though these fantastic, amazing things happened for some of those in faith, for others in faith, they were tortured. But they still refused to turn from the Father and their belief in him and obtaining a better resurrection. We see those that were stoned, like Stephen. Some were cut in half, like the apostles. Some were killed with the sword. Some were tormented. Some were afflicted. But they still held on to their faith. They never turned from the Father and their belief that he was bringing about something better for them and for those that came after them. It says that all the ones that were noted, obtained a good report through faith. And some of us, we're like, how do we get a good report with the Father? It says that these folks, they got their good report through faith. So, I mean, maybe that's all the things that were written aforetime were written for our learning, right? They obtained a good report through their faith, and they still didn't receive the fullness of the promise of the Father. And because the Father purposed that they would be made perfect with us. That's eternity. When it talks about that you will be joined together with those who had gone on before us, I think that was in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. That like they'll be made perfect with us. They will inherit eternity with us. And since we have all these examples, chapter 12, verse 1 tells us to lay aside all the weights of this life, the sin that slows us down, and instead run our race of obedience with patience, focusing on the Messiah, who is the author and finisher of our faith, who, for the joy that was before him. What was the joy before the Messiah? Have you ever thought about that? What was the joy that was set before the Messiah? I'll give you an answer. You were the joy. Even in your sin and your disobedience, you were the joy. And it says that the Messiah, who for the joy that was before him endured the cross, even though it came with shame, he endured it and now is seated at the right hand of the Messiah. We know that the joy wasn't going and being seated at the right hand of the Messiah, because the text tells us, scriptures tell us that he did not think of his equality as something to cling to. So he wasn't promoting his equality. He wasn't promoting the opportunity. He wasn't looking forward to the opportunity of being able to be seated at the right hand of the Father. That was a position that he had already had. The joy was reconciling us, of completing the assignment, of walking in obedience. It goes on to talk about how the Messiah endured much hostility. And as sons and daughters, we should not despise the chastening of the Father, because who he loves, he disciplines. Just like earthly fathers. And it doesn't feel good in the moment, but afterwards it produces fruit of righteousness, which we know that the Messiah is what? The king. He rules with a scepter of righteousness, which means that the kingdom is led by righteousness. And so if we endure the chastening of the Father, the disciplining of the Father, it produces fruit of righteousness with us. And what is the kingdom looking for? Fruit of righteousness. So as we move deeper into the chapter, we see the writer speak about how the Israelites initially at Mount Sinai heard the words of the Father and asked him not to speak to them directly anymore. You remember that? You remember that from our study? Oh, that made me so mad when I read it. Anyway, but he asked them not to speak directly to them anymore. But in this time now, the Messiah, those who are with the Messiah, the believers, are come to Mount Zion. No longer Mount Sinai, now Mount Zion, the heavenly Jerusalem, the city of the Father, and home to countless angels. We are living in the church of the Messiah, with the Messiah now as the mediator of a new covenant, that by his blood, which speaks better things than the blood of Abel, it speaks better things than the blood of flesh. It speaks better things than the blood that is crying out against us. His blood is now speaking for us if we accept it and believe it and decree it. So we should be careful, according to the writer, to ensure that we do not refuse to listen to the Father like the ancestors refused. Because he has promised that he will shake the earth and heaven, and only the unshakable things will remain in this process. And if you and I, if we, the readers as well, if we are truly citizens of that kingdom, the Father's kingdom, then we are unshakable, because the kingdom is unshakable. So the writer tells us to serve the Father with fear and reverence because he is a consuming fire. And as we move into chapter 13 and the book ends, the author gives various instructions to the readers for how they should live their lives, to continue in brotherly love, to be mindful of interacting with people because you may be entertaining angels. Remember those because actually the angels are in heaven and living in this same city, this New Jerusalem with us, right? Remember those who are in bonds as if we were in their shoes. Remember that marriage is honorable and that those that dishonor it, the Father will judge. To be content and to not be covetousness. He gives them, he gives them more instructions like that. He tells them to not be carried away with diverse and strange doctrines, but to remember that this is not our home. That this is not our home. That we seek a city that is to come. This is not our home. As believers, we are seeking a city that is to come. He tells them to offer praise to the Father continually as the fruit of their lips, and we should do the same thing and give thanks unto his name, to do good and communicate, and these things please the Father. Obey those who rule over you as they watch for your souls and must give an account to the Father for it. He closes the letter, he closes the book here by asking them to pray for all those that are with him and to pray that the writer is able to come back to them soon. He formally closes with what we call like a benediction, and then the author's salutation that he's writing from Italy. All right. And so that is the fullness of the book of Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 7 to 13. You can go back and watch chapters 1 through 6 and get all of it together. We're getting very close, folks. Thanks for joining into this assignment of walking through the entirety of the Bible book by book in one calendar year. And so that's all I got for you guys today. Let me know what stood out to you from the book of Hebrews. In our next study, we'll be looking at hold on, give me a second. I didn't have it in my notes. That's my bad. I think we'll be looking at James and 1st and 2nd Peter. I'm pretty sure it's James and 1st and 2nd Peter. So you can go ahead and read James and 1st and 2nd Peter. We'll be looking at those in our next study. But that's all I got for you guys today. I love you, but more important than that, the Father loves you, okay? Let him love you. Start before you're ready and don't stop. I'll see you guys next time.